but actually interact with them with the technology, and those are some of there. And then again about the design of e-materials, number 6 is rather than having them as browsing structures, we potentially design our materials a little bit differently. The last ones are more sort of teachy stuff. And talking about embedding things in units of study rather than having them as adjunct courses. Okay, I think that's all I had. I did it. That's my sort of tips and tricks if you want to improve achievement, motivation, for students. I was just having a bit of a noodle as I was reading all this literature, thinking about what would I tell a student if they wanted to improve their achievement outcomes in terms of the motivation literature. What would you do? But all those have lots and lots of things unpacked into them. I just want to acknowledge some people that were involved in the project over the years in different ways. Okay.
Thanks.
So, systems versus individual things.
Fight.
Discuss. Oh, no, it's interesting.
There's a question?
Hello.
It wasn't a question, I guess, so much as a statement, and
Yeah.
since you threw it out there. I'm really interested by the systems approach because it seems to me and I noticed a tendency that we all have of thinking of motivation as a thing, and I love the concept of it as an emergent sort of system thing, because when you take into account the fact that it's applied differently by the same person in different situations. I've seen situations in the classroom where there has been that initial vibe of students waiting to be, imbibed in our knowledge or whatever else, and once you actually get them doing a task which, for instance, calls on their own existing knowledge and then comparing that to somebody else's and as a point of discussion, and then that leads into the actual learning activity and sort of exploration of concepts. You're kind of short-circuiting that idea of motivation as a thing, because you're actually sucking a lot of the students who might not have self-efficacy or might not have some of these other factors into coming onto a level playing field, or a more level playing field. That was just
I think even the hardcore cognitive folk in the psychology space would move away from an idea which was pretty dominant, probably 50s through to the 70s, of trait-like qualities in terms of motivation or potentially even cognitive processes, to a more situative thing, especially when they start considering domains, but even when they start considering the nature of different tasks. With the environment or the situation interacting with the person and whatever else is going on, lead to a resulting, I don't know, a particular motivation level or type, versus that person being motivated wherever that person physically goes. But I don't think it's getting to where you're thinking. Yeah. It's interesting.
The thing I found interesting about what you were talking about is motivation kind of goes into thin air. You're kind of saying that interest might be a more compelling way to be describing what's going on rather than the more traditional motivation things. Is that what you're seeing yourself in your own work, or are you kind of seeing that more generally in people who are kind of working in this area? more interest in interest than they are interest in motivation?
I mean, the bulk of the work is being done in those other constructs, just because I think there's a strong tradition, especially in America, in that space. Whereas I think the interest is very much, it's newer and it's distributed across, actually, we've got expertise in Australia and Europe, continental Europe, and America. So it's a nice situation of a bit of more of a global approach, and it's also being picked up especially by developmental psychologists. They tend to operate in different spheres to the educational psychologists at times. So, yeah, but that one does seem to be the development of the person. I was reading some work about identity. So how does interest and identity develop in concert, maybe is the right word. But yeah, I think the motivation is continuing to, those other theories and things are continuing to be looked at in different ways, but the constructs seem to be fairly stable, a lot of them, yeah.
Lena, I think.
Also, perhaps a little question and slightly comments together. Thinking about in general complexity theory and cognition. Of course, motivation, self-efficacy, interest, learning, even cognitive load, they are cognitive phenomena. And we can look at it from different ontological perspectives. We look from complexity perspective, we look for more or less traditional information processing perspective, and so on. So for me, complexity theory is a theory for explaining cognitive phenomena, which could be applied for motivation, could be applied for learning itself, for knowledge, whatsoever, for any actually cognitive phenomena, which could be consciously experienced. Now, as with all such phenomena, we have different instruments to access it. Like, same would be for any other complex phenomena, like temperature. You could measure temperature using existing instruments and say now the temperature is like this. So we have instruments for measuring motivation. Now the motivation is like that in this classroom or for this student. But in general, what is the temperature? Where it is? It just, kind of, it's a measure obtained using certain instrument. So I think between your perspectives, I don't see any contradiction at all. They are just simply two different ways of looking at phenomena. When saying, well, if you apply ontological perspective, one ontological perspective would be complexity. The other perspective saying, well, but if we measure it using instruments which are designed for such purpose, just simply to fixing this temporarily emerging state, it would be this one. Whether you can really model motivation, and specifically say motivation is influenced by knowledge or knowledge influenced by motivation, I think it's a little bit tricky question. When we use even the same critical realism, they say, well, phenomena emerges from the lower level phenomena. And now we have all phenomena at the same level, consciously understandable, consciously accessible, motivation, learning, and so on and so on. So we kind of, in psychology, we still don't have this lower level. Almost when we try to do that, we directly go to the brain, neurosciences, leaving quite big gap, And I think it's a challenge in education in general that we kind of immediately have to jump to the neurosciences. I don't know, it's just my reflection. But my general comment that I thought, well, those two perspectives nicely complement each other.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Lena. The thing that attracted me to the complexity stuff was actually something hard for kids to learn. So that's why I studied learning it. But then I got increasingly intrigued by the possibility of its relevance for us looking at, in my case, learning cognitive sciences, but also education more generally. The issue that we raise in the educational psychologist paper, though, is that we basically have in education a lot of siloed theorizing. So we have theories, and we were focusing on situative theories and cognitive theories as sort of an example. It's there's a very clear debate that's been going on for 30 years that most people would say has not been reconciled. Both sides would maintain that a situative, well, they would maintain their level, if you will, of the system is the primary one. They say, well, the other perspective is fine, but ours is the most important level. The Situate folks are arguing that very clearly, and the cognitive folks are arguing it. What we propose with the complex systems conceptual framework of learning is that from a complexity perspective, you're looking at these things as different levels. And there's no principled reason to assume primacy of one level over the other. And we also allude to, but don't really tackle it in the paper, but I think it's the same issue with neuroscience. There are folks that very much feel, well, to solve the problems of education, we gotta go to neuroscience, and that's the level where it's going to be most important. And we would say from the implications of which kind of tinkering on whether we have a framework or a meta theory, that's going to be repeating the same mistake that was made to be arguing that cognitive or situative perspectives were the best level from which to view learning. But this is one of the reasons why we're having symposia and we're getting people from different theoretical backgrounds to help us kind of sort through whether there is some value of taking these principles from complex systems and whether that can enhance theorizing that we do. So that's kind of how I'm viewing the complexity thing with the theory, not as a replacement for the other theories, but as maybe some conceptual tools and methodological tools. We have the abilities to be modeling things based on complexity techniques that have not been used in educational research. And what we've been arguing in some other papers is that there's some real potential to be using some of these different types of modeling techniques that have been done.
I was wondering, like, a comment that kind of, I think, bridges between your talk. So, like, in this idea that self-efficacy is a, I guess, construct, predicts a lot of outcomes. I wonder, in terms of, like, general implications for learning design and, like, kind of the contrast in the studies that you mentioned in your talk between productive failure and direct instruction. Is there potentially an implication that learning designs that are more direct instruction, where the students have less agency, like they're kind of expected to just take on this information, blah blah blah, versus learning environments where they have far greater agency for their ideas, they're kind of maybe like more respect for kind of like contributions and a leveler playing field, or like, is there an implication in that sense for cultivating self-efficacy at a kind of higher level? Does that make any sense?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's nothing wrong with factors, so don't get me wrong. But you see, the thing is, I think some of the theorizing that we have says, well, we've got self-efficacy and we think it comes from such and such, or we've got motivation and it comes from such and such. But it's not really. The why you get those things isn't really tightly delineated in terms of how it might come out from micro-level interactions of what individuals are doing, or different points in their life where they're engaged in different things, issues of timescales. So,
it's very crude.
Very clearly, this kind of data is finding these patterns. That's what a factor is. So there's something there. So I would say it's emerged, but I think we've got some exciting opportunities for research to kind of explore what are the things going on from which certain kinds of things emerge, and different things might emerge or not emerge. People come out with very low self-efficacy in a particular area. Trying to find ways of theorizing and doing research to go across levels of education and learning systems is where I think we have some real opportunities for some exciting things.
I was interested in Michael's talk when he first started talking to me about the work that they'd done. 'Cause what I look at self-regulation sometimes as well, and what happens with choose your own adventure or sort of unscripted throwing students into unscripted, difficult problems, sometimes they just sort of get lost, and they actually end up with lower self-efficacy and lower outcomes and different things like that. So I was very interested in his pairing of the instruction, the direct instruction, with rather than just leaving them as that sort of open-ended problem discovery learning, which I've seen research that says that often it doesn't usually work unless they've been scaffolded over time to be able to attempt things like that.
Yeah.
So I was very interested in the
Yeah.
pairing of the pedagogical approaches. Actually, I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. I've described productive failure in one paper that you have to have a zone of proximal failure. So if it's too hard, they're going to give up.
They run away.
If it's too easy, then I guess they already know this stuff. So, so rather than proximal development of Vygotsky, proximal. So that initial task, you need to think carefully about the students and so on, so that they're going to have enough challenge in generating ideas and stuff. And then you're going to provide what Manu calls a consolidation, not a lecture really, but a consolidation phase. So, question.
So I just had a general comment. I found your direct comparison of direct instruction with productive failure very interesting. And I found your more macro view, Catherine, very interesting as well. What I'd love to see is, does your pattern where a more effective learning experience comes from a productive failure, more interactive environment, hold over your very broad range of units of study, Catherine? And if it holds, then that suggests that yes, the way we design our learning environments has a huge impact on our student experiences. Maybe it doesn't hold, and students with high self-efficacy are able to construct a positive learning experience for themselves in direct instruction classrooms, independent of design.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, I mean, at this point, you probably don't have detailed information about the learning design or pedagogical approach of all these different classes.
No.
And some people have been working on things like that. Nancy Law is very interested in things like that. I mean, Peter's done work in that as well. But I would suggest that we typically, I've called these, I've had a notion of what I call sequences of pedagogical structure. I would suggest that the vast number of kinds of experiences that we have students do start with some kind of high structure. There's some kind of presentation. There's some kind of, you're reading the textbook. You're doing something that's providing some structure, and then we might have some things that are low structure. You're working on the homework, or you're doing the tutorial after the lecture. Approaches like productive failure and some similar designs where you start off with low structure, more degrees of freedom, and then you follow it with high structure, I think are much less common in educational experiences that students have at all levels of education. And I agree, I think there's a need for some research that would start to explore that. We're trying to get some funding. I've got a couple grants pending where we'd be trying to do some of these things a bit more at scale with the Department of Education in New South Wales to try and get some information leading to that. But it's not. But it does mean you need to be resourced in a way and then be able to access a range of schools and some longitudinal aspects of it as well. But I think there's a real need.
Should we be finishing?
I guess so.
Chair.
Thank you once again to our speakers, and